Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're at. My name is Kevin Porman. I'm a developer advocate here at Salesforce, and welcome to codeLive. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Narinder Singh. Narinder, you want to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you live, what you do, that sort of thing?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm a Salesforce developer who is working at a platinum consulting partner in Germany. I am a developer by title, but I do everything and anything that I can find around Salesforce to work with.
Cool. Cool, gotcha. So, how long you been working with Salesforce?
3 years
3
now.
years. All right. Very good. Very good. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and our setup for this is a little experimental. So bear with us as we try to try this out. What you're going to see on the left side of the screen is me writing some code. On the right side of the screen, you're going to see Narinder working inside Salesforce doing, and we're both going to be doing the same thing. So if you've ever thought of like a Rosetta Stone type coding versus point and click development type situation, that's what we're going for today. We're going to show you how to do the exact same thing in two different technology stacks. I'm going to write some code, and Naren is going to use what is it? External service doodads, or external services. Okay. And for those of you who've not played with external services are a way of providing Salesforce a JSON file or a bunch of JSON, and then from that JSON, Salesforce develops flow elements for you to use. Is that a good summation?
Yes, basically, if to get in a bit more detail, it basically generates Apex in the background, and that Apex is exposed as invocable methods in your screen flows, or basically flows. Yeah.
Now,
And then the callouts.
for those of you going, but wait, that sounds like cheating. Kevin's just going to use those automatically generated classes. Actually, I can't. That's just not. There's no way for me to see what those classes are. You're going to generate those external services methods and flow elements, but when I go to look inside Apex, I won't see those classes. So I'm going to be writing everything. What was that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
You won't be able to see classes.
And so what I'm going to be doing is because integrations through APIs and Apex can be a lot of boilerplate code. What I've done is I've pulled into this org the code we put into Apex recipes for making REST callouts. So I've got the REST client class here, and I've got the mock factory testing library we have, and I've got the tests from my REST client. But that's the only code that exists in this org so far. And we're going to be using I'm going to be using that little bit of code to generate the work that's going to make the call out. And our goal at the end of this is for me to be able to hold up my phone and show you that I got an awesome text message generated by either our invocable methods / external services or the Apex code. So with that said, where do we start with this, Narinder?
I guess the best place to start with this is external services. Let's see how we can actually create one, and then we see step by step what are the basic details that we need in order to create the external services.
Cool. Somebody's Salesforce break is saying good luck code, low code face off. Karthik is saying there's no audio. Is anybody else having any audio issues? Let's make sure that we've got our audio going out here properly. Narinder, when you talk, give me a little bit of talking here.
Excuse me, what?
I was going to ask you to say something.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I'm getting
Then
audio
I
from.
guess.
Yep, I'm getting audio here. It looks like we're getting audio out. Karthik, if you're still having issues, let me know. Somebody's saying you can't hear Narinder. Audio's fine, somebody else is saying. Okay, great. So we're just going to pretend that audio is working. Now, you were going to say we start off with external services?
Yes, and that's where we go to find the external services. We search for external services in the setup, and we end up on the UI, which allows us to create external services.
Okay, and so for those who are doing this, seeing this, we're going to be trying to integrate with Twilio today, specifically the Twilio messaging service, and we're going to have the ability to send via SMS and WhatsApp. Is that true?
Yes, we can definitely do WhatsApp as well, but in order to do that, it's a sandbox environment that Twilio provides. So it's a bit more work. So we're gonna keep it simple. We're gonna just use Twilio API to send simple text messages.
Cool, cool. Twilio to send text messages, and all right, that sounds like a. I love it. All right, so where do you want to start? We're going to create a new external service.
Absolutely. So I already have one, but that's just for the schema. So we're gonna say Twilio API underscore codeLive.
All right, there we go.
Now, if you can see here, you see a bunch of inputs that you have to provide in order to create the Twilio API or the external service.
Mm.
So the first thing is you need a name credential, and we're gonna shortly talk about that just after this. And in addition to name credentials, what you also need is a schema, a JSON schema, which is also known as Swagger schema, which is basically just a JSON formatted API specifications
And
that
where'd you
allows you to define what's the callout is going to look like and what will be the response.
and where did you get this for Twilio? Did they provide it? Did you just have to write it?
So there are a bunch of ways to do this. I'm not sure if there is that one exists for Twilio, but I created this by myself. And we can also talk about briefly how normal admins can take a shot at it and create their own JSON's Swagger schemas.
All right, lead on. Show us how you created that.
All right, so what we need for that is swagger dot inspector.swagger.io. I hope that's the one. Yes. So the UI is a bit stacked up because of the windows are stacked. But basically what this Swagger Inspector allows you to do is define your callout definition very much like a postman. And once you do the callout, it generates the schema. It allows you to create API definition from here. So let's say we want to do a callout to this and we want to do simple send. Then this gives you a response and you can see the status. And you can select this from the history. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can actually see.
So, are you familiar with the concept of a REPL, Narinda?
Excuse me, what?
A REPL, REPL. It's a old acronym that goes for read, eval, print loop, and the idea is that it's a way for you to interactively program, sort of in like a shell. It's kind of like execute anonymous, where you can type some code and then hit a button and it runs and then gives you the output. And I was just kind of thinking that this Swagger API here is kind of like a sort of a REPL for creating this schema file that we need.
Yes, I believe so. Yes, we can put it that way as well for the understanding purposes. Yeah, so essentially if you have used Postman, it's very similar to that. You can define your parameters, you can define your headers and authentication parameters as well. If there is any body, if you're doing a post, then based on the callout, once you do a callout, you're gonna see something in the history here. And if you select this, you can actually create a API definition. And once you need to log in, you need to have an account here. Once you have an account, you can create an API, and then that provides you the definition that you can use with a bit of changes. You would still need to make some changes, and then you would be able to use it inside your external service.
Cool. So you're gonna So we create the external service from the schema. So the first place to start is the schema, and you created
Yes.
this just based off of sort of working with it until you got to something that was that worked for you, and you did it based off of
Yes.
the Twilio API docs.
Yes.
So I guess if we work
So
back one
Twilio,
more step, it's sort of like the first place to start is the API docs of the place you want to integrate with, right?
absolutely. That's the
Okay.
first place we actually need to go when we are integrating something.
Okay. And you already
All
have
right.
an example of this API, this API schema definition, right?
Yes, I have it with me here. So I'm gonna jump here.
Gotcha. Use the one you already created. I can see that.
Yeah, let's make it a bit nicer. I'm gonna copy this and put it in a code so everybody can see a nice view of it instead of.
Yeah. Okay. Now we have
So
dueling VS Code and up and running here.
yes,
Okay, so you got a Swagger definition, host, base path.
yes. So all of these keywords you can basically pick them up from the Swagger documentation on their website. They have this documentation where you can use these keywords to define your schema. Uh, it basically starts with the Swagger property in the JSON schema, which defines the version that you want to use. Spring 21, I think we should be able to use 3.0 as well, but I'm not sure because I have yet to read the release notes. All right. Then what's next for us is we want to go and fill in some info, some basic details like title, description, and version. And then comes a property in the Swagger schema, which is called host. So this is basically the base URL or the host to which you will be making the callouts to. And schemes is basically on the server that you want to go, you will be making callouts with. So HTTPS, which is the normal standard now. And then moving forward, base path is basically like an extension or resource URI,
Mm.
which gives you the resource path that you want to access on the host where you are making the callout or the external API or external system. Then this is basically what is going to be sent, what is going to be the format of the body which you are sending to the external system. And same goes for this, that what you will be consuming.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're going to say, hey, we're just going to send a application/JSON, and we're going to expect application
Oh,
www.form URL encoded back. Is that right?
it's it's the reverse.
Oh,
So
the reverse.
we're
Okay.
gonna receive, yeah, we're gonna receive the JSON and we're gonna be sending the URL encoded form.
Okay. I had that backwards in my head. We got a question here. Somebody wants to know. Salesforce Break says, so Swagger is the API broker kind of in between SFTC and Twilio. No, Swagger is a collection of tools, one of which is a protocol called the Open API spec?
Yes,
Yeah, Open API
yes,
spec. And then Swagger are tools to help you generate that Open API spec. And on the flip side of it, for a number of languages, including Apex, there is code generators available that will take that Open API spec and then generate code for you to use. There's some dragons in those waters. The generated code. I've never had a lot of good luck with it. That may just be because I don't do it enough. But I've never been a big fan of it. The Swagger doesn't sit in between Salesforce and Twilio. It's more like a collection of tools to help us understand how to talk to Twilio and vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Swagger
let
is
me back up.
basically
In the background, when we put this JSON schema there inside Salesforce external services, what Salesforce is doing on your behalf is generating from that schema the Apex code required to make those callouts and interact back and forth.
yes.
Yep.
There are other ways of doing it as well. I mean, I know Salesforce, when external services were introduced in the early days, they also supported inter-agent hyperschema. I don't know really what it is, but it basically allows you to do the same thing. Essentially, you are just generating the JSON, which understands or basically defines how the callout definition is going to look like for a specific endpoint. And then you can have multiple endpoints within the same Swagger schema or JSON definition.
Cool. So let's pause there and let me get caught up with you and where we're going with this. So I'm going to do some coding here, and we're going to do the same thing in code, basically. So I've created a new class. Now, if you've seen how Apex Recipes does this, we have in Apex Recipes a REST client, and that REST client contains all the methods necessary to grab an authenticated a name credential and then turn around and make API calls to it using post, get, delete, patch, etc. It provides those verbs in a very sort of boring way to another layer of code called a client layer. And in this case, we're going to create the Twilio API client. And to do this, we're going to have it extend. Here we go. We're going to extend extends REST client like that. Okay, so we've got the ability to have, let me get rid of my notifications here. And I'm going to do at test visible, and I'm going to say private static final default named credential is equal to Twilio, which just means I'm saying I only want this class to ever interact with the Twilio named credential. And the reason we're going to do that becomes really important here in just a little bit. And it turns out I'm going to need to give this a type, public private static final string, like that. That'll be helpful. And then I'm going to also say we're gonna have a default path. So we'll say test visible. Why test visible? Because I'm making these private. So private static final string string default path. I should make that capitalized. Default path, and I'm going to say this one is Nurinder. Can you bring back up your your Swagger definition here? I'm going to crib from your Swagger definition, and that the base path is /2010 2010-04 dash, what is it? 01. Okay, there we go. And we'll stop that there. Now in our constructor here, we want to just set the name credential property. Now this name credential property is inherited from our REST client. So if we go over and look at REST client, we've got I'm going to scroll to doom here. We've got a REST client or named credential name here, and we're going to go in here and do, in our constructor, we'll say named credential name is equal to this dot. Well, we don't need this. Let's do default credential, name credential, like that. All right, so whenever we construct an instance of Twilio API client, we are locked to using the named credential Twilio, right? We can't deviate from that. It's set in stone. Boom, Bob's your uncle. All right, now I don't have to generate an API for this, like a I don't have to generate a JSON schema, but I do want to note down that I'm going to expect to receive JSON, and at least out of the box, I should send URL encoded, which is important because I was expecting when I first looked at this that I would send JSON, but it turns out we're going to send some URL encoded work. Okay, so why don't you pick back up, Narinder, while I look at one of the questions that have come in?
Yes.
Ryan.
So going.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so let's quickly see how we actually define the callout which we're gonna make. So paths is the basic property where you define the actual resource which you're going to access on the external service. And in the paths, you can define multiple paths, which will be basically the multiple endpoints or resources that you want to access. In here, we simply want to access this. And how do we find this is we just basically read the documentation for the Twilio API. And in there, you define how you're going to access this endpoint. You're going to do a post. So you define a post property, and then there are some basic things that you need to define. Summary, not needed. Operation ID. So operation ID is basically that will reflect as the name of your external action that you can use in your flow. So if we go back to the definition of the Twilio API, you're gonna see that it says action name, send SMS or WhatsApp message, and that comes from here.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool.
And in addition, what we need to define are the parameters.
Mm-hmm.
So parameters, you need to define the name property of the parameter, and you also you need to define how that parameter is going to be consumed or be sent in the request. So in here, we see that the account SID is sent as in the URL path. So we defined it as path. And this basically is then exposed as a parameter when you use this action in your flow builder. And then same goes for the other parameters where we use the phone number of the user where we want to send the SMS. And we say that it's going to be sent as form data. And the type will be string. Is it required? Yes. Same is for from. And this is going to be the phone number of your Twilio account which you are using to send the SMS. In addition, we have an additional parameter, message service SID. It's not necessary because it's not required according to the docs, so we can skip that. And the last, and which says the body, which is the text message which you want to send to the customer or your contact in your Salesforce.
Okay, I'm just taking some notes here in my code.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that defines the callout definition that we want to do. But then we also, what we want to consider is what will be the response of that callout that we are going to do. And based on that, we can do some operations if we want to really work on the response that we get when we do a callout. So how we define is, in addition to parameters, there is another property which we define as responses. And here you can define multiple responses based on what you can expect from the external service or external system. So if you are doing a post callout, then 201 is the general parameter that gets sent back. And then we can define it as here. So schema, which is referencing a definition that we have defined here. So it's just like a reference so that we don't cluster the JSON schema and keep it neat. So we have all the definitions we can put in here and then simply reference them in the schema. So we are doing RS response 201, which is defined right about here.
Okay.
And we set a bunch of properties, account SID, body, data, date sent, error code, error message, from, what's the status, and yeah,
So this
to URI.
so this response data is going to come back as a JSON blob. This is effectively a DTO, or a data transfer object. So this is the schema for the result data
Yes.
we're going to get back. If you're familiar with the DTO concept, it's a way of serializing data to a set shared schema between two services. And so you may have logic and business logic in your Apex class A, and then a DTO object that mirrors it. And your class A will serialize data to that data transfer object, and then use that data transfer object to send data to the external service. Or it may receive data from the external service as that data transfer object, and then hydrate that back into a useful object inside Apex. So that's a handy way of doing that, but that's under the definitions section. And we've got errors, and we've got a 201. What happens if we get a 404?
Yes, so you need to explicitly define that in the schema so that you can handle a 404 or a 401. To keep things simple, I did not define that, but you would need to define that if you want to handle, let's say, a 401 unauthorized access error, or some, let's say, 400 or 401 bad request. So yeah,
Okay.
for those you need to explain, and then you can basically use the same definition. Maybe
Ah.
say error would have the same definition, so I would simply copy this and call it 401, 404. Yeah, it's a bit of overhead, but it works.
Okay. So you got the JSON schema, you've put it into Salesforce, you've created your external service based off that. Now, what do we have to do to actually use it? And before you go into that, I want to pause and answer a couple questions we've gotten here. Ryan wants to know, is there a comparison between the use of external services, writing Apex to implement the Swagger definitions, and writing only Apex custom connector in Salesforce that implement the Swagger def? Ryan, we may not have been perfectly clear here. Of the three options you gave, only two of them are actual literal options. The first one is to write that Swagger definition, or be given a Swagger definition, and turn around and use that in external services. So that's option one. That's what Narinder is working on. Option two is to take an API documentation. Maybe you don't have a Swagger definition, or you don't want to create a Swagger definition. If you've got API docs and you understand how to read them and understand how their API works, you can write raw Apex to go and do it. And that's what I'm doing. If you're looking for a comparison between when you should use one over the other, I don't know that there's a good when to use one over the other, but a nice one thing we might try and take away from this is the ability to create like a decision tree or something like that. My general feeling on it off the cuff, if you're gonna nail me for a solution right now, would be do whichever one you're more comfortable with right now, because if you're not comfortable writing Apex, that's not really an option for you. So do the name credentials, do the external services, go down that route. If you are writing Apex every day and you've done tons of integrations, you may not be as familiar with Flow, and you may not want to do a Flow, so write it in Apex. That's why we have options. I don't know that there's definitively one way that is better than the other, although there are a couple advantages to the external services one, namely being you don't have to write all the unit tests for it, you don't have to worry about deploying all of those, etc. So just a little bit food for thought there. While Narinder has got us caught up with the Swagger definition for the external services. Let's dive back into the Apex code for just a second and look at how we're doing this. So we've created a constructor. So when we create our class, our integration client class, we're going to tie it to our Twilio name credential. And then I've created this sort of stub of a method here called send message. That's not a great. We'll do send SMS message to phone number. That's better. Nubner number. And we're also going to need a string of to address. Okay. And I've just sort of taken notes as he was walking through the schema of the required fields and that sort of thing. You know, things we're going to need a body. That's what I've called the message to send. We're going to need the from number, and we're going to grab that. That's going to be I'm going to create a new constant at the top. And then the SID will also be a constant. So let's just go ahead and do those. Private static final string. We'll do count SID. And
you could grab the SID from the credential username using merge field syntax.
Say more.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of that?
I mean,
is this the account SID then? This username here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we could probably pull that in via merge, but for today, I'm gonna put it here in our code, and yeah, we'll just do it that way. And then, come on, give me my semicolon. Private static final string from address. And this is going to be equal to, and this we have as a constant, don't we? In the flow itself, we can see this. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up the flow and pull that out here. Why don't you go into how we actually use these flow actions that it's created for us, or how to tell it to create them for us from the schema, while I pull that out.
Yeah. All right, so once you have the schema and you have defined your name credential, you need the name credentials to make authenticated callouts. If it's an open API, you would still need the name credentials, but you can simply say no password. And then you simply register your external schema, and what's going to happen is it's going to do its magic, and it's going to surface you some information for that specific registered external service. And you will see some actions along with what you can send and what you can expect to receive. So it says input parameters, account SID, to, from, messaging service ID, and the body. And output parameters to 1, default 200. All this information is coming from what you defined in your external schema.
So you put it in the external schema. You gave that schema to Salesforce. Salesforce generated this for you. So this is sort of a confirmation screen.
Yes.
Okay.
And it tells you what you can use in the actions. So all these actions that you see here, you can directly reference them in your flow. So let's see how we can use them in our flow.
Where did you attach this flow? To contact, I assume?
Yes.
Okay.
What we did is a quick action which calls this flow and allows you to put some message, and it goes and sends the message. So I already have a flow built, but we can also create it from the scratch. So let's take an actual look how it works. So
There we
I
go.
have a flow, but I guess I need to zoom out a little bit to actually show the whole flow, or I can redesign it. Let's make it
I
this
love the little
way.
like waterfall that's happening here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I generally tend to use the water flow because
Yeah.
otherwise you would spend a lot of time just straightening up the connectors
Right.
and it's a pain.
Have you tried auto layout? What happens if you turn on auto layout?
Yeah, I mean, we could do that as well, but it says,
Can't open it in auto layout. Ruh-roh.
yeah, yeah, I
Ruh-roh-roh.
guess the feature is not there yet for some of the design. So yeah, I generally tend to use this. I just have a preference. I'm faster with this, I have felt. So
Totally.
just, uh, yeah. And also the auto layout feature, as we just saw, doesn't support everything. So if you are building complex flows, then it's uh, better to design it yourself so that you can, once you see it, you can straight up see, okay, where do you want to go in the flow.
Got it. I like it. Whenever I end up doing a flow, it ends up being not auto layout, and it's sort of a crazy, like a real look into the craziness that is my mind, because I can follow what's going on the screen, but it is not laid out in any way pretty.
Yeah, that's true. And
Okay.
especially when you have a lot of stuff that you want to put with decisions and loops, it's very chaotic.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
Let's, at least we have the layout set up correctly now.
Okay. So walk us through this. What is this What is this doing?
All right. So the first thing that we need to is get the contact information. And how do we get it? We simply create a variable which is named as record ID. And we want to make sure that uh, we, we want to make sure that the variable name is exactly the same, because it gets auto-populated if you mark it as available for input with the ID of the record from where this flow is invoked. And we will be using this flow or invoking this flow from a quick action. So that gives us the record ID. And once we have the record ID, we can pull all the information using the get records element. And you can simply choose automatically store all fields. Salesforce, I mean, the flow builder is pretty smart. How they do it behind the backend is they do not store actually all fields. It's a very different concept, I guess. Some other time. So then we have an assignment element which basically gets the receiver's phone number. I'm storing this information in variables, and then receive a WhatsApp number which is coming from the mobile number of the contact.
So you're just pulling in that field. So we're going to set the who are we sending this to via the assignment from the record. Okay.
Yes. And then we have a screen element which nicely asks the user, what do you want to send, SMS or WhatsApp? And then we simply take in the message from the user and pass it on to the flow action which is coming next.
Okay.
And here I'm just using two default choice, which is SMS and WhatsApp.
Okay.
And if the decision is WhatsApp, then we do an action using WhatsApp. And if it's an SMS, we do an action using SMS. It's essentially same SMS, but I mean same action, but how you send the parameters decides what actually how the message is being sent as an SMS or WhatsApp. So we'll look into that shortly. Let's see how the action is coming. So if you pull up the action element from the resources tab or the elements tab, and you can search send SMS and you will see your action in the list. You choose it, it will ask you for some parameters that you will have to send in order to make the callout. So let's take a look what we are passing here. I have defined some variables. So account SID we already saw in the code, where we are passing the account ID that we need to pass to make the external callout. Then the body of the message, phone number, where the message is coming from, and who is going to receive the message. And you also see an additional parameter that you don't really want to send, so that's also fine. Then you click on done, and that's how you define your call out action in the flow.
Okay. So somebody's asking how we set up our name credential. You want to show off that?
Yes, good question. So let's quickly take a look at the name credentials. How Twilio works, how the authentication works with Twilio API is username and password based. So when you create your account, you will get account auth token, something like that, which you can use in your Twilio credentials. So you create a name credential and you set up as password authentication, and you can then pass your username, which is basically the account SID, and the auth token in the password. Make sure to check generate authorization header so that it does the call out successfully. So that's the basic setup of name credentials. You can also do OAuth 2.0 using the auth provider. That's pretty cool. So yeah.
I like it. I like it. So I am working over here in the code base to sort of put together how we're going to send this off. And let me just walk through a little bit about what we've got going on. I've got my method set up here, and I've got it's going to respond an HTTP response, just as what we're going to do. And we're going to have a post path. We're going to build this, and according to the documentation, the actual path that needs to happen here for the messaging API is to have it go from our default path, which we put up here, /2010-0401. Then we're going to have /accounts / our Twilio account SID, and then /messages.json. And then we're going to pass in form data. So we're going to messages, and I'm going to put a question mark here because I'm constructing a URL query path. And so we'll have from, like that, from, and then a from address, body, which is our message to send, to our to address. And it occurs to me that I probably need to preface these with little ampersands so that we get the proper URL encoding. And
you would need to send this information in the body of the callout.
I could send it in the body, but because it's URL encoded, I can also send it in the URL. And so,
yes,
just to make this simple, I was going to do it this way. We could do either one. If we look at our method here that we've got, our post method, I'm using the one that has two parameters. One is the path and the other one is the body. So I could, put this in as my body and stop it here, and then pass in the rest of it in this. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that. Let's do that. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll say string post body is equal to, and I'm gonna just do from, and I'm gonna make this a little bit more readable by doing some indentation here. Okay, and then I've got that there, and so what I'm doing is now, instead of doing an empty body, I'm going to say post body. And because of the magic of our REST client, that intelligent abstraction that is a REST client we can use for making post, push, post, get, put, patch, delete, we don't have to do much more than just that. It's already set up to return an HTTP response, so we're just sort of chaining that in there after constructing our parameters. And so that should give us the basics of what we need to do. And I think we're both at the point where we've got a setup where it should work. Do you want to demonstrate how yours sends a message first?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So let's kick some ass because developers need to write tests as well, but we don't.
Oh, you're going to bust out the test thing on me? You're going to make me write tests?
Trust me when I say that I have to write test as well to the client, and they're like, can't we do it declaratively?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm one of those people who actually
So
enjoys
now
writing
that we
tests.
have
So
our flow ready, in the flow we just basically, based after the action is done, we simply set the status of the whatever the SMS or the callout was, and here I'm simply showing the JSON response that we get. So let's go to a contact in our org.
you can send it to me.
Yes.
Okay. I am setting this up so that I can grab my screen, and share it.
All right. Let me know when you are ready to receive an SMS.
Give me just one more second here. Gonna make it a little bit smaller so I can drag it over here. Now I can make it a little bit bigger. Okay, go ahead and hit me with an SMS.
All right. So let's say an SMS, codeLive. What do you want to receive, Kevin? Do you have any specific request?
Yeah, codeLive demo work fine.
Hey, Kevin. All right, let's hit next. So the Twilio API doesn't exactly sense the
Oh, there it is.
SMS exactly, but we do get an SMS because it's fast.
Hey, look at that.
All right, so
Send through your Twilio trial
you see a
account.
bunch of response.
Yeah, I like it. All right, let's look at this. Let's try the same thing,
Yes.
but I'm going to do it with code. So first thing I need to do is
Let's
actually
see.
save my method, save my class here. Minor details. Maybe. We can do it, computer. Save. It's not giving me the little like, oh, there we go. Whew! I was like, how did I break Visual Studio Code? Okay, so that created that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to hit, I'm going to create a new tab, just a new tab in Visual Studio Code. Maybe. I'm having difficulties with Visual Studio Code today. I don't know what's going on. Okay, so now that I've got this here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm just going to treat this as an execute anonymous window. So I'll do Twilio. If I spell Twilio right, it'll be, better. Twilio API client is equal to new Twilio API client. I don't really have to do much there because I've got that constructor set up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say tac.send SMS. What did I call that method? Send SMS message to phone number. And go over here. All right. And I'm going to send this. What should we send here? Hello, codeLive peeps. And I'm going to send this to, I'm going to redact my screen a little bit here so that you can't see my phone number because I don't really want to have a ton of messages. Let's see if I have a good there, and then what I'm going to do, there we go. I'm going to use the command palette to do execute anonymous with editor contents. And it's running, and I got an error. Missing closing quote on string. Yes, it turns out I did in fact forget to put a closing quote on the string. But where would life be without typos? And we got a failure to run again. Script thrown exception.
Ooh,
REST client make API call.
That explains why we should use external services.
Yeah. Although I'm certain if I can get this one thing figured out, it'll work just fine. Script throw an exception on line 133. So let's look at what line 133 says of our I like Doug's answer. If you don't have typos, are you really writing code? Okay, so this is failing on a script thrown to failure to send our API request. Why are we failing to send our API request? Coded query. Okay, interesting. So what about this is not right? Let's sort of just do some debugging in here. Let's go ahead and say system debug post path plus post body. We'll save that.
We are not passing the path.
Oh, look at you debugging me from half a world away. It's post path. Silly Kevin. No donut. Okay, so let's try our call again. I'm gonna just nuke our output here, and we'll put us in Apex mode so we can see this. And I'm gonna do execute anonymous with editor contents. Okay.
Tell me it worked because I can't see your screen.
Yeah, I'm having some. Visual Studio Code is running very slowly for me. I don't know what the deal is. Execute anonymous with editor contents. And that appears to have worked. Wait for it. Wait for it. Do we have a message? You know what we should do is we should send this to the screen so we can see it. So we'll do system debug like that. Now we'll execute anonymous Apex, and as we scroll down, maybe okay, at the very bottom we look at this, it says here's our path. We don't have any double slashes. Oh, we don't have a question mark there at the end. Okay. Bad request status 400. Look at that. Well, if we go back to our client over here, what we can do is we can start this off with a question mark.
But do we really need to specify when we are sending it as a body? Just wondering.
I mean, we could do... Well, let's try this first, and then we'll see what happens.
Yep.
Go back over here. Execute anonymous. Okay. And come on. Come on. You can do it, Visual Studio Code. We're still getting a bad request. Are we gonna... Bad request, status 400. That's... okay. Let's try it this way. We'll do it just as a path.
Yeah.
Okay. Make this a little taller. The URI is invalid. Can I print the request? Over here in our we can debug that at the request and see what it gives us. So let's go ahead and execute that again. That one failed to run as well. So we've got the endpoint callout. That looks like it should be legit. Oh, you know what? The body is not URL encoded, which would mean we'd have to probably do some URL encoding here. But let's for the sake of testing this in our 3 minutes we have left, I don't want code to suffer by not having a success here. Let's go ahead and just send a single message. Maybe, come on. Here, we'll do it this way. Hello, codeLive peeps. And now we'll run Qt Anonymous. That completed without error. We still get a 401. So let's double check that we're matching. So that's what their URLs look like. Because we should be sending this with the name credential should be taking care of our actual authentication. So, and if now we're sending it as a body again. Execute anonymous editor contents. Please run the API on Postman first. I don't have Postman set up right now to do that. Do I have a trailing slash after the query parameter? Well, if it would ever let me scroll down and look at my here we go. After the query parameter, so messages slash JSON and then query parameter and then then that and so no, we don't have a trailing slash. That's a great debugging point. Can I print the request? The request came in. Here's my request right here. Yeah, this is a That's a tough one, but it looks like low code is one because it is 2 o'clock, and so we have to wrap up for the day. Narinder, thank you for joining me. I feel a little bit of egg on my face that I can't get this to work here in the Apex. I'm curious as to why, because we're generating URLs that look like they should match the requested API spec. So I'm going to keep digging in this. I might tweet about it in joy or frustration in a little bit, but we'll get it working. Thank you again for joining me, and I will see all of you next week on Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, for some fun and typos. See you then.
Yep. Thanks, Kevin. Thank